Hey everyone, we are back. I'm back with my brother.
Hey everybody.
Philip has decided to join us again. He is so accommodating, or something like that. I don't know. So yeah, every once in a while I throw in another family member, and we talk about stuff, and we impart our massive amounts of knowledge or something.
I know, yeah.
I don't even know what it is, but we blabber on for approximately 1 hour. We say, you know, airwaves pass through our vocal cords or whatever. Uh, Words are stated, and hopefully you actually get something out of it. Oh, our father is watching. Hi, Dad. How's it going? Are you proud of us?
I'm sure our massive disappointment to him right now. So
Yes. How's it going, Kevin? Good to see you on board. Let's see if here we got any YouTube. Are we all of our different things are live? Just making sure we're good to go here. We'll wait for a couple more people to get started. We got a decent number in the chat here. Uh, Jennifer, how's it going? Good to see you on board. And then Kevin, yes, extremely large brains. We actually have fairly large heads. Wasn't your daughter's head?
my daughter, yes, my daughter has. She's in the 97th percentile in weight and the 95th percentile in head size.
So basically, she has an enormous brain.
I hope so. I mean, at 19 months, I mean,
at 19 months, you can pretty much tell she should, like, if she doesn't win a Nobel Prize for this point.
I'll be super disappointed.
I'm super disappointed
Yes.
too, as a very disappointed uncle
Yeah.
and my niece, who has a brain that's in the 95th percentile, doesn't win a Nobel Prize.
I mean, there's still 5 percentiles higher than that, but okay.
Dad. Hi, Peter. Good to have you in. Thomas, you as well. We are going to be talking about property management. We are going to be talking predominantly about whether or not you should manage yourself or whether you should hire a property manager, and when you should, like, what are the advantages, what are the disadvantages, how you should go about doing both, what situations are best. If you want to talk about just property management, I mean, stick with us. We'll talk about that too. But we also had a previous live stream. I will link to that in the chat when we're done here, as well as a couple articles on this subject. But our main topic is whether you should manage yourself or manage. Or have somebody else manage for you. And I guess the main point we have to make before anything is there is no right answer to this question.
We honestly can't answer it for you.
We can give you the framework. We can discuss the advantages and the disadvantages, how you should go about those different, how you should go about it, how you should look at things based on, what are the things you should look for, how you should do it if you decide to do it. What are the try to, like, put, if you're in this frame or you're in this position, which one I would go with. But it is a decision you have to make on your own, and there's only so much we can do. So I guess we'll jump right in here, and we'll start off. I would say we'll start with the advantages of. I'm gonna start with yourself or hiring it out. Which one's better?
Probably yourself.
Okay.
That's how it will naturally start. You kind of have to actively make the decision for someone else to do it.
So, I mean, there's too many. You got money, you got time, and if by doing it yourself, you're saving money. Now, the biggest problem, of course, is you're spending your time, and your time is worth money. So it's sort of give and take. But right off the bat, that's a major one. I mean, the average property management company that I see for offsite property management is 10% of the rent, and often 100% of late fees and other excess things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily, but I usually see it that way.
And a lot of times there's a leasing charge too for having to lease a vacant unit. They'll charge. I mean, sometimes it's up to 1 month, a full month of rent. Sometimes it's half month, and that's always negotiated between the 10% versus a rental fee and stuff like that. So there's lots of different structures.
I mean, right off, if you got a property management company, you're going to be paying, 10% of your income, all of a lot of the bonus, like you have a late tenant. I mean, and that's kind of like a double whammy. Like, first of all, they screen this tenant, they put them in, and then now they're not paying the rent on time, and they're collecting the late fees themselves. I mean, then you're also paying either half to all of the first month's rents. If you have a larger property that's on-site management, you'll usually be paying about all of their expenses, so their payroll, all of their office expenses, everything, because it's basically a little business, as well as usually about 4% on top of that, which is like their profit margin. So you save all that if you're managing yourself.
Aaron Wright from on Facebook is saying he pays 10% in the Midwest. That's about industry standard. That's nothing
Generally
crazy.
what I've seen. Yeah, I think the
So
lowest I've seen is 8%,
yeah.
and usually one half to a full month's rent for new leases. That makes a lot of times they have to charge that because a lot of companies have moved in the direction of hiring like third party leasing agents, and so those leasing agents are paid on commission, and they're paid by the first month's rent, and so they are just basically passing along the first month's rent to these leasing agents that they've hired on commission. The next major advantage is you have increased control. I mean, this is pretty obvious. If you've hired out your property management, I mean, you can watch from afar, you can look at reports, you can demand certain things, but you're relying on someone, like not only somebody else like an employee. You're on a third party company to oversee your property, and so
I think there's two really important things that go along with that. One, it means the incentives aren't necessarily 100% aligned. I mean, a good property manager, and I say good, is going to want you to do well, obviously. But that doesn't mean that they're always going to put your interests in front of their own interests at certain times. It doesn't mean that they're doing anything wrong or evil or anything like that, but they have their own interests as well, and it might counteract with yours at times. Also, they're just go ahead.
Oh, just kind of play on that. If anyone's ever read Freakonomics from way back when, I mean, there's a discussion on real estate agents.
Oh yeah.
And how real estate agents generally sell their own house for slightly more than they sell their clients' houses for when compared to, like to like. And there's a similar thing with rentals. It's a bigger advantage for the property management company to simply rent the property, make sure it's rented quickly, than to rent it at the highest price. Because if $1,000 is $100 a month for them, $900 is $90 a month. That's a $10 difference. So just get it rented, like pushing the prices higher, especially if they have other inventory. There's also, it's not as big a problem. Kind of on the other side of that, to sit vacant for them. If they have 10% vacancy overall, and those 10% just happen to be your properties. I mean, for them, they're doing fine. They've got 90% occupancy. Maybe not great, but they're doing okay. For you, you're doing horrible. So it's much more important for you to get those leased and get them at least at a high price than it is for a property management company.
They're just trying to keep. I mean, their incentive is just to keep the contract more so than anything. The other reason that's kind of having someone else do it is a hindrance is nobody in the world is going to care about your rental properties as much as you will. It is just basically impossible for that to happen. It is your money. It is your asset. You are going to care more than they are ever going to care, regardless of how good they are, regardless of how, great of a business person they are. It's your asset, and the ownership is really going to make a change. They could be more talented. They could be better. They could have more time. They could have more knowledge. So they could still do it better than you. But you're going to care more, and that's going to make you work harder and do better and just, treat your residents better and just kind of do all this stuff because you care more, basically.
Yeah, I'd say the next point is it's easier to avoid fraud, and particularly with this, it's not so much the big frauds. I mean, I've seen that happen. I heard one guy got $60,000 stolen from him, and we know a case back in Oregon of major fraud.
Yeah,
where an entire company went down like Bernie Madoff style. We might get into that later, but it's the little things, lots and lots of little things. Overcharging you for this, overcharging you for that. Not kickbacks from contractors.
We have some experience with third-party management. We do most of the management ourselves, but tell a story about down on Benton with the thermostat.
Oh God, yeah. So this is a good example of I don't know if you call it out. It's not fraud. It's just like getting nickeled and dimed for ridiculous things. So we had to call a maintenance order and a check, and for the furnace wasn't working. So so they sent their maintenance guy out there, and according to the resolved work order that we could get through our portal to their property management software, the cause was, or what the problem. What he had to do is he had to show the tenant how to use the thermostat, and they charge us a cool $150 for that. And so you have enough of those, you're not going to make you're not going to make any money.
No.
Showing thermostats aren't particularly complicated, and so you've got. I mean, there's all sorts of things like that. A lot, charging big up fees for overseeing the turnover. Like maybe they deserve a little bit for that, but how much are they getting? All sorts of I've heard of property management companies renting out units and then pretending they're vacant and just pocketing the rent. Like, I mean, there's all sorts of, I mean, most don't do this, but there are some bad apples out there. And doing it yourself increases the odds that you'll be able to avoid that. And the final one, and this is kind of, even if you decide to go with a property management company, unless you're out of state, there's a major factor of just gaining experience and just learning the business and learning what property managers go through and learning what tenants or what the problems that you have, because regardless of whether you're going to manage yourself or not, you're going to have to manage the manager.
Yes. I mean, I can't tell you what your life situation makes the most sense and stuff, but if you can and you have the ability when you're first getting into into real estate investing or property management, and you have just 1, 2, 3, 4 units, I just would highly, 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 highly recommend doing it yourself at least for a while, even if you don't plan on doing it forever, because you can't, in my opinion, you can do real estate without actually doing the work of property management, but you can't do real estate right unless you know how to do property management, because there's no way to really know if your managers are doing well unless you know what to call them out on, unless you know what they're doing wrong, unless you can see how their business is run and what mistakes they're making. If you don't know enough about it, you can't figure out who's a good manager, who's taking advantage of you, who's doing things incorrectly. And I feel like that experience is extremely valuable to be able to manage a manager correctly. And that's often what I see when people get in trouble with third-party property management companies is they don't know enough about it themselves to be able to call out a management company on doing things that are wrong. They don't know enough about just construction or leasing or the laws or just basic, ways to increase rent or things like that. And then their manager's really hurting them and they just don't even know it. And if you have that experience, you can call them out, find out who the good managers are, switch companies when necessary, be comfortable taking back your properties for a period of time if you need to while you're finding another one. You don't want to feel stuck of like, I have no options but this company. So that's kind of a lot of the stuff. To answer Michael Reed's question on Facebook, how common are kickbacks from contractors and vendors? I mean, it's impossible for us to really know because we're not really,
it's happened to us before.
It's happened. I know it's possible. I know it's happened. And if you do real estate long enough, it's going to happen to you. I can't know how common. I just know it happens to lots of people.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you can make it, like if you're seeing your expenses just don't seem to comport to reality, or you're, that's a sign, something to look into. You're looking for these red flags. If you feel like you're getting charged too much, especially if the property manager has this one consistent, like they always use this one contractor, ask for a second bid. If you get a lot of pushback on that, that's a good sign. Especially, and then they get that bid, and that bid's substantially lower. That might have something to do with it as well.
But also, you got to be careful. People who are kind of deceiving you are tricky. I mean, we had a situation where someone was kind of doing things not above board, and we asked for a second bid, and they went out and were getting another bid, and they asked them to bid something completely different. So their bid looked way higher than the one that they were trying to get approved. But it was really because they were different things that they were bidding out was the reason for it.
And one of the things I would recommend, for our own internal scopes, for our scopes of work on projects, we say that basically we want we want you to put your bid on our scope. I used to accept scopes from different contractors, and they were all different formats, and they all looked ridiculous. Comparing them was incredibly difficult, especially since this contractor didn't bid line items, 17, 24, and 39, and this one didn't bid 25 and 27, and it's like you just can't really compare all this stuff.
You got to compare apples to apples.
And so we use Smartsheet, but you can use Excel or Google Docs or whatever. I would recommend really, unless you have like one property and just can't really demanding that they put each bid on the same sheet. I've never had a contractor have a problem with this. I mean, I think most of them kind of would prefer you. Most of them are happy to get a scope of work that's detailed and outlined, because they often get like these nebulous, vague requests, like I want this kind of fixed or whatever. So you have it specific. They will generally be fine. I just ask, like, I want these quotes on the same sheet, a type of sheet, the same scope of work, so I can compare them like to like and all the rest of it.
Jeremy West has a nice comment, says on Facebook, he says, it seems to me you either have to babysit your tenants or babysit your property manager. I think that's somewhat true. The nice thing about babysitting a property manager is just one person that can babysit all your tenants for you rather than having to maybe babysit 10 to 20 to 30 residents. But I mean, on some level, that's kind of true. You have to be managing your manager. So.
And Peter asked for out-of-state properties whether you need to use PMs, and property managers, and pretty much. There's managing, managing a property from out of state yourself is pretty much a non-starter.
I've heard of people doing it. I don't honestly know how, so I wouldn't recommend it.
I mean, you could patch together using Rently for leasing, or hiring a third-party leasing company. Like in Kansas City, there's a company called Leasing.
Trusting a contractor that you're only calling, and I just think that's just a really tough situation.
Yeah, best of luck to you, but I think you probably need to have a property manager. The land home buyer asked, would we share a scope of work document? Our scope of work document is not very. I can share with you the document we use when walking through a property. I mean, we could share a sample scope of work, but most of it is blank. You don't do it until you fill it in. So if you want that, just if you want a scope of work, just do the following, or any of these documents. I'm happy to share them. Just find me on BiggerPockets and send me a colleague request and tell me what you want. We have to be colleagues. If they're not colleagues, I can't share the document with you. But if you're interested in that, I'm happy to do so.
And Nick 11. I'm getting your
Nick's 11.
Yeah, on YouTube, saying whether you have a property manager or not, at least leave room in the numbers for a property manager. I think that's really smart. One, pay yourself if you're going to be doing all the work. You need to be able to do that. And also, I mean, sometimes you're forced into a situation of having a property manager. Think if your health goes down or you have to move all of a sudden, you might be forced into a situation of having to rely on a manager. And that's a great situation to use one, but you need to be able to afford it at the same time.
And jumping in on that, if you're buying a property, this is particular for multifamily, but it's true for single family is almost, you value it based on your CMAs, your comparative market analysis, which I should make sure to do a live stream on that. But you do that, but and secondarily you might have a cash flow, you do a cap rate, whatnot. Multifamily is valued mostly on its cap rate, and you're doing an analysis on that. Regardless of whether you put in a number for property management, if you sell the property, the buyer that you're trying to get to buy your property will put that number in, and it will reduce your. So you can't buy without a property management fee and then expect to sell without a property management fee. You're just hurting yourself there, and you're valuing the property incorrectly. You absolutely need to put a property management fee, even if that is paying yourself for your own work. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's see. Let's go to the higher side. So the biggest advantage on hiring is I don't know if it's a big advantage. Right off the bat, you save time. Yeah. So you're costing yourself money, but you're saving yourself time. You don't have to show the property. You don't have to file evictions. You don't have to call tenants who are late. You don't have to deal with get maintenance calls. You don't have to call vendors to go out there and do this. I mean, there are things you have to do. We'll get to managing.
If your house catches on fire, you're probably going to get a call regardless of if you have a property manager or not. So
there's stuff you got to do, but you can save time in that respect. The next big one is the infrastructure is already in place. If you're gonna set up your own property management company or just manage yourself, you need to find contractors. You need to find the basic vendors, plumbers, electricians, whatnot. You got to have people that you can call. You've also got to find some way that you can deal with emergency calls. Now, the vast majority of those are water related. Plumbing, water shooting out of some...
Or toilet related, or HVAC related.
Yeah, I mean, the worst ones are water related.
Yes, that is correct.
I mean, generally with HVAC, if you can't get out there that night, they can bundle up or something.
Well, and I mean, honestly, if it is an emergency and it's, really, really hot outside, all the AC vendors are already working, so the chances you're going to be able to get someone that a property manager isn't going to be... It's just... Yeah, you're not going to have a lot of luck finding somebody in that kind of situation. Mm-hmm. So you can try, but it's pretty tough usually when everybody's working already.
Yeah, and so, but I mean, I do really like that they're Snake and Rooter or Roto-Rooter. They are very expensive, but it's nice to know that there's a 24/7 company you can call for plumbing-related matters. And that's nice. But there's also companies, and I don't have that you can call regarding. That do like maintenance for do-it-yourself property managers, and they'll often have emergency call lines and stuff like that. This is a good thing to just develop these relationships. But at the same time, like infrastructure, like Section 8 is really tough to deal with. Like in Kansas City, they're impossible to deal with. They don't call you back. They don't do. Property management companies have things like that. They have policies. They have property management softwares. They've got accounting. They've got these things in place. They might not be any good at any of it, but they are there.
And they might be good at it. So
Well, they might. They might not be. Implies that they might be. It's like I'm not saying they're not.
That's the managing the manager part. So.
And then the other thing is you outsource your headaches, at least many of them. And there are a lot of really, really rough headaches in property management. Most of the tenants are great. You kind of got a Pareto's principle, the 80-20 thing. But there are some tenants that will drag you up the wall. There's some professional tenants who will try to take advantage. They try to take advantage of you regardless. There's also just those probably the most irritating ones who call with maintenance problems every day, every week, or whatever. And you just, if you're managing yourself, you got to take that. And it's just something you've got to be prepared for. There are going to be a lot of annoyances. There's going to be a lot of headaches. There's going to be some issues that don't exactly have a clear answer. There are going to be issues that kind of like, okay, well, this isn't like, particularly with like charging a tenant back, do you charge them or do you not? It's like the window's broken and they say the neighbor threw the baseball through it, but it's also like, like, can you prove that? Does it matter? I don't know. So,
one other thing real quick about that you can take advantage of outsourcing it is you can take advantage of someone else's economies of scale sometimes. If you only have 1 or 2 units, you're having to pay a contractor that one time. You're pretty much getting homeowner prices in that situation. If a property management company has some infrastructure, they might be getting economies of scale in terms of pricing, in terms of just availability of things, and you can take advantage of that in that situation. If they have 200 or 300 units, they might have on-staff people who they're paying less than a normal contractor would, and so sometimes you can take advantage of their economies of scale by joining up with kind of the rental portfolio they're already managing. You want to do some questions?
Cell phone expertise asks if anybody's smoking crack.
Only no. This morning, not right.
No, well, we've had a few tenants, particularly the ones we inherited. So you might. I don't know. Let's see what else we got.
There was one question about does Section 8 managing Section 8 cost more? I've never heard of someone charging more for managing Section 8 properties. I assume there's some companies that really don't know what they're doing with it or don't really want to deal with the hassle of it, or
perhaps don't accept it.
Yeah, they don't accept Section 8 residents.
I know most that manage properties that have a HAP contract, which are generally larger apartments.
Yeah. And
this is the project-based Section 8, so it doesn't follow the tenant, it follows the property. Those generally charge more, but I have not seen.
My friend Matt just joined. Hey Matt, what's going on?
I have not seen any. I haven't seen anyone charge more just for Section 8. Do you pay property management if a rental is vacant? Technically you're not, because you're paying 10% of the income the property brings in. So you're technically not paying them. You're still under contract with them, but you're technically not paying them. Now, remember, if property is vacant, most property management companies charge a leasing fee. So it's a half month to a full month's rent. And so once they finally get it leased, then you will be charged that leasing fee, and then you will, and then they'll go to charging you 10% of the rent. So let's see here. Let's see any more questions.
I'm having trouble getting down to the questions that have kind of been pushed down on Facebook. So if we didn't get your
here, no, let's go to there here. Switch that up.
There we go.
Okay. So let's see.
This was one from Montel Johnson a while ago. If I manage my properties myself, should I create a separate LLC? I don't think you necessarily need a separate LLC between your property management side of your business and the side of the business that actually owns the real estate itself. But I think you need a LLC for that whole operation.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that a lot where companies will have a separate LLC.
Yeah, I don't think you need it.
You don't
I think
have
it's
to.
fine to have.
Yeah, I mean, our property management company, we call it 333 Rent because that's our phone number and our website. So you go to 333rent.com, you call 333 Rent, you get our, whatever.
Yeah.
But we don't. Our main company is Stewardship Properties, but we just have a separate DBA, a fictitious name for 333 Rent. Whereas you could set up another. I've seen this done a lot, and I've heard it's normally done this way. We just couldn't find a major advantage or reason to have another LLC. We have enough LLCs. TEC Properties asks, what are the number one fees as a property management company you should charge? Now, are you talking about charging like a client if you're a property management company? Or are you talking about charging tenants? If you could clarify that, I'd appreciate it.
I can answer both of those. I mean, for a property management company, the biggest one is just the rental fee every month that you collect. Charging tenants, I think the number one is a late fee and enforcing that pretty strictly and making sure you're consistent about that, not forgiving late fees. That's kind of what I would say. That's one thing where if you have a property management company and they're not pretty strict about late fees, I'd be very concerned. And that's where you need to have the experience yourself of what happens when you're not strict about late fees and either experience that or be unwilling to experience that and do it right from the get-go to know if your property management company is doing it wrong, to basically call them out on it or find someone else who will do it correctly.
Oh, this is a little awful. Well, Dane has asked what's the best way to find a commercial real estate agent. If you're looking for like commercial real estate to lease or sell or buy commercial properties, the two places I go for asks for referrals would be the RIA group, wherever that's there. Although most of them you're going to meet are residential agents, or they'll have no residential agents. And also look up the CCIM group. CCIM is more commercial real estate. You can go there. You can also just go to LoopNet or CoStar and just look who has the most listings and just give them a call and see and maybe sit them down for lunch, ask for references, that kind of thing.
Jake Johnson asked a question on Facebook. Unless something is clearly the tenant's fault, you should have to, well, I guess not really a question, but you should just have to accept the repairs are a normal part of owning rental properties, get it fixed quickly and move on. This is not a business for you if you can't accept that. I generally agree with that, Jake. I think that's the right way to do it. Good thing to ask your property management company about how they do it. If they're too kind of gung-ho about we're going to charge our tenants for everything, you don't have to pay for anything, that's probably something to be worried about because they probably have a lot of residents who aren't willing to pay those charges, or they're just going to get mad, or they're going to move out because they're getting charged for things that are unnecessary. We do a pretty good job of clarifying that with our residents. Every time someone signs a lease, we go over it. We kind of basically state it's either going to be charged to the owner or the resident, and it's our job to determine who's responsible.
Yeah, and if you've got a tenant that's just impossible to deal with but hasn't had any problems, when it comes to renewal, you can just not renew this.
That's true.
And now this should be. There are laws in certain states. For example, in Oregon, what's the new? They have a. I don't know if they have a non-renewal charge. They might. I think the renewal charge you got to pay for like their moving expenses, or if you raise the rent too much, they leave.
Some new legislation.
So there's a lot of laws going on, particularly in more left-wing cities and more high-priced markets. Peter asked about annual inspection fees. I don't see people normally charging inspection fees. Property management companies charging inspection fees to tenants. There was a question earlier. I can't remember who asked it about having. How often do you want to inspect your properties? And I would say. We are trying to do now probably twice a year.
Yeah, semi-annually.
Semi-annually, and we're looking.
Yeah,
semi-annually. Yeah, we're looking for leaks. We're looking for make sure there are no leaks. Make sure we replace the furnace filters. Make sure make sure that the AC unit isn't covered with a bunch of debris.
Cleaning that up.
Make sure they don't have unauthorized pets or unauthorized guests, or they're not a complete slob.
Also, one thing they do is they take our maintenance technicians who go out there on these what we call PMIs, preventative maintenance inspections. They get a general sense of the condition of the premises and they report that back. And if someone's just totally ruining our house, we don't want them to continue to ruin it for years and years. We want to get someone in there who's going to respect the property and not cause a lot of damage. That's the biggest expense you're ever going to see as a property manager or a real estate owner is damages to your property. So even if someone pays on time every month and isn't a hassle, if they're destroying your house, it could cost you 20, 30 grand. And that's not something that any resident is really going to be worth if they're doing that to you. So getting on that fast and early is always nice, and not renewing those leases is important. So that's pretty rare, but it does happen.
Okay, I mean, I guess I would talk. This is going to be very broad, and if anybody wants to ask like what their situation is and what we recommend, I mean, we can do our best, but kind of the situations that make the most sense for hiring and versus doing yourself. As we said earlier, well, one, if you're out of state investing, um, I think you pretty much have to go with a property management company. And I'd say a couple things with regards to out of state investing. If you're going to be out of state investing, you want to go to the place where you're going. You want to look around. You don't want to just rely on Google Earth. Google Earth usually makes it look nicer than it actually is. You don't get the smells, the things moving, the just like the like the the garbage on the street blowing in the
So
wind.
a lot of details missed and
Yeah.
just pictures and stuff.
And maybe go by it in the evening or at night, see if it's a mess. You want to look on websites, see what the crime rate is. You can do that city data or CLR search, or there's some more expensive ones you can get. You want to look at its income. I would say whenever you're buying out of state, you want to buy at least one class higher than you'd buy in state. So if the lowest you'd accept is a C plus where you live, then if you're going to out of state, you should accept at least no less than a B minus. I mean, that's my rule of thumb for that. Of course, those categories are a little vague. You want to look at the demographics there. You want to vet the property very closely. You want to vet your team very closely. Ask for references, all the rest of those things, particularly property management company, because you are far away, and you want to visit and check on them. We'll get to managing the manager here. We still got a half hour. We'll get to that here in a little bit. But so out of state investing, you want to be very, very careful. You want to vet all the property, the demographics. Don't take any assumptions from your market. You live in San Francisco. It's very expensive. You go out to I don't know, Kansas City maybe. Kansas City, it's a lot cheaper. That doesn't matter. Every market's local. You got to get that out of your head real fast. So out of state investing is definitely good for managing hiring a management company. As Phil was saying, and I think it's probably good to start yourself, regardless of which
if you
direction you want
can,
to go.
yes.
If you can, I mean, if you're a doctor working 70 hours a week, you're not going to be able to do that. But if you can, I think it's probably best to start yourself. Learn what you're going to be dealing with.
Especially if you're planning on growing a moderate-sized portfolio of some kind, and that's when it really becomes a burden time-wise. You want to start managing it yourself a little bit early when you only got one or two so you can learn it, and then you pass it off when the time burden really becomes strong at 20 houses or 20 units or whatever you end up getting to. It's just a good introduction to it. You understand the processes, you know the laws, you understand how these general interactions work. You've gotten burned a few times because everybody does, and you kind of understand how the management company should be treating things. So.
Mm-hmm. And for the most part, I'd say if you're very small, it probably makes sense to manage yourself too. I mean, this is an incredibly important asset to you. Let's say you have one house you're renting out. Is it worth giving that to a property management company when you can manage it? Giving 10% of the income on your only investment property.
Again, you care about it more than anybody else. So if that's your only big investment, you're going to care more.
The other thing,
it's nice to hold on to.
Yeah, the other thing is if you get really big, I think you want to have your own property. Now, one note is if you're buying large property, you're buying 100-unit apartment complexes, you can probably go to like a Yarco or whatever and just use them. But if you're buying a good number of houses, at some point, I think you want to have control of that and not being reliant on another property management company. I've seen property management companies do well, and then for example, one all of a sudden they got the business of a hedge fund, and they had several hundreds and hundreds of houses and apartments just thrown at them, and all of a sudden their quality for all the rest of their clients just went down. And it's hard to you got to be ready to switch at any time, but it's a lot easier to switch 2 houses to a new property management company than 200.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there is sort of a third option: manage yourself, hire a company, and build a company. And at some point, which is the direction we've went, is you got to build your own company. So if you start to get really big, I think you do want to bring it in-house. For the most part, of course, this is all a little we can't give you any hard and fast rules. These are just kind of things to think about.
Building a company can be as simple as hiring someone part-time to do leasing for you, or hiring someone to do some basic administrative organization for you. It doesn't have to be like I'm hiring 3 full-time maintenance people, and could just be someone who's on a small scale helping you out with things. You want to keep it professional on a business level, but you don't have to think of building a company as this huge thing right off the bat. It can grow pretty organically in that situation. There are a couple of questions I want to get to. Land Home Buyer talked about, do we go ahead and charge the residents for replacing furnace filters instead of giving it to them? Most of your tenants just never change the filters, even though I give them the filter for free. We actually put the burden. We have kind of a unique way of doing this, which is why I kind of want to get this question. We put the burden of this on the residents to do. It's their responsibility to replace the furnace filters. It's their responsibility to do this basic upkeep of the property. But like we talked about earlier, we do preventative maintenance inspections. And part of that whole process of them letting us into their property and stuff like that, we kind of say, we're going to do a courtesy furnace filter replacement for you for letting us, inconvenience you and all sorts of stuff like that. So it kind of is like we're giving them a benefit. It is their responsibility to do, but we're going to give them a courtesy for inconveniencing them and stuff like that. So that way we kind of get, but we make sure it gets replaced while also not taking the responsibility on 100% ourselves and giving all the liability to us. There was another question that I wanted to answer. Yeah, which one was it? It was, the 24-hour. Do we have 24-hour answering service for emergencies, and how do we define an emergency? We do. Currently, our maintenance manager, who's been awesome, has been taking those calls for a while now.
Shout out to Tony Lindenbush.
Yeah, he's been awesome with that. He's been really taking care of it. Andrew and I have both done it in the past at times.
It sucked.
And also, one thing we're able to do, because we're the person who has to deal with taking the calls, is never the person who actually goes out on the actual maintenance repairs, unless me or you have had to do that before. Mm-hmm. But regardless, we do. How do we define emergencies? Usually, it's something that's going to get worse before morning, something that is unreasonable to live without for a night or a weekend, or something that's unsafe. So like no heat, that's we got to try to get that fixed as fast as possible. We can't necessarily. I mean, if there's 10 feet of snow and ice everywhere, we might not even be able to get to
one
the property.
Thing I really like the way you put it before. To keep in mind is like we are not. Like if they were a homeowner, like they cannot expect us to necessarily get out there quicker than they could get somebody out there on their own. Mm-hmm. And so it's like we can. I think with heating issues, you got to try to get somebody out there.
We have more resources, but it's not like we have inexhaustible.
I mean, unless if it's 80 degrees outside and you're trying to get cool, like deal with it. Yeah. Just deal with it. But if it's like we'll do it in the morning. But it's like if it's 100 or let's say it's 5 degrees, and you got your furnaces out. That's worth looking at. It might not be able to fix it, but it's worth looking at.
And also, I mean, we can try to do things like getting space, but that's just a safety issue. Carbon monoxide alarm going off, that normally would go to the fire department, actually. But there'd be situations like that. It's mostly safety issue. Yeah, things that are going to get worse. Not having a toilet is probably the one that is the least like of a safety issue, but the one we definitely got to get out there.
How often does that happen to you? We just rent a honey bucket and drop it off.
No, I mean, I can't remember exactly. It's always changed with how many units we have and stuff like that. I mean,
or if you have a roof leak that's really bad, of course that might be hard to fix. But it's like,
well, there's also different. Like, if you get a call at 3 a.m. and we are opening at, our guys are coming in at 8 or something, like, okay, we can deal with something. You can deal with it for 5 hours. If it's on Friday at 6 and we're not having anybody working again until Monday at 8 a.m, well, okay, not having hot water for 3 days and not being able to take a hot shower, like that's something we're going to try to get out there over the weekend to fix. We're not going to get there that night, but that's unreasonable.
Unfortunately, there's no hard or fast rule, but the question asked is one, like, can they live without this for a while? Like, this is really an emergency. Like, and generally it's water and HVAC, and I guess not having a toilet thing. Of course, you got to remember, if you have a 2-bathroom house and one toilet's not working, they can wait a day or two for that. Life goes on. They would have to wait a day or two for that if they were a homeowner. And so that's a big question to ask yourself. And you got to be, again, if you're going to be a property manager, you got to have a little bit of thick skin. You got to be able to say no, and you get better at it. Like, it used to be hard for me to say no, and then in property, tenants will beat it out of you. They will beat that weakness out of you. You will learn to say no much more easily.
Brandon Cutchinson, I think I'm seeing that correctly. Is there a general rule or a general number of units? I think you butchered it, actually. I can't quite see it from here, but anyways, is there a general number of units that is enticing for a property management company to give more attention, care, effort, etc. into your units? For example, having one single-family house versus a 13-unit complex. I would say I hope not, because if they're doing that, you probably don't want. You want
I mean,
someone who treats everybody
it happens,
well.
but they will never admit it. The
Yeah,
only thing that it possibly get is a discount for a large
that's
quantity
what
of
I would say.
units.
Yeah.
But yeah, they will never. Oh, we treat everyone the same, and so whether it's true, I mean, it very. Some of them will. Like the one example I know of getting a huge number of units, and all of a sudden they weren't very good for it anymore. They were obviously treating that bigger company better, but I mean, it's more along the lines that just overload. I mean, it's happened to us to a degree. We only managed ourselves. We doubled in size over the course of 1 year. It was hard to take on that inventory. We're still dealing with that.
Well, I would just say if you're with a company that is doing that for you, I would think that's not a good deal to take because it means they're willing to give substandard service to somebody else, and that means at some point they might give that to you. And if you're ever not their big customer anymore, I don't think you want to be in a situation. So I would say
no, if you get a little bit of a
companies
discount,
gotta-
I mean, go
a
for it.
both discounts is definitely a thing of property management. That's very different, but the service that they actually give you should be equal regardless of how many
So
units.
Kelvin asks, what are some examples of obligations on the lease to the tenant? So obligations to the tenant, I'm assuming, like obviously the big one is paying rent
Paying
on
rent.
time. Some of them would be, no damage to the property, no making alterations.
It's mostly things they shouldn't do.
As thou shalt not.
And so we don't do a lot of things to like force them to do. We have things that we say are their responsibility, but we rarely ever pursue those things. It's one of the reasons why we do the courtesy filter exchanges because we want the responsibility of them. We want them to feel that sense of ownership and do it, but it's hard to make people
It's
do
like
things.
a lot of times, like a few thou shalt do is thou shalt pay rent, thou shalt take care of your lawn,
Yeah.
thou mow that. That a lot of thou shalt
Pay
not.
utilities.
You
Keep
got to pay
utilities
utilities. Got to keep your utilities on. You can't make alterations to the unit without permission, and the permission will always be declined. Always.
That's not 100%
okay,
true.
mostly declined. Mostly.
Most things like
Okay.
painting and things like that. But there are a few exceptions.
like we don't allow people to use the fireplaces, so that's an obligation. You can't have people occupancy. Like you can't have somebody stay in the unit for more than 10 straight days or more than 20 days overall. Yeah.
I'm laughing at my dad commenting on Facebook right now.
And then we've had so there's another one. No unauthorized pets. If you need to have your pet basically apply with because we don't allow dangerous breeds like pit bulls or anything like that. Unfortunately, no. I know there are a lot of nice pit bulls, but I can't take a chance. Anyway, you have pet rent and pet deposits. So it's a lot of those types of things. And then no making a racket after 10 o'clock.
It's mostly things that they shouldn't do. The obligations of the residents are things to not do, not things that they have to accomplish, other than pay rent for the most part.
Rent, keep care of your lawn, and you must tell us if there's a major maintenance issue.
Yeah.
We have got too much. I would say with regards, if you're going to hire a property manager, I'd say property managers are probably the best for if you have a small to mid-sized portfolio.
Yeah, I would
now,
say
of course,
true.
you can manage it yourself. But if you're not big enough to be a full-time real estate investor, at least a full-time buy and hold real estate investor, but you have enough that it's a large amount of time, that would probably be the time I'd most consider hiring a property manager, like 5 to 20 units. Like, of course, now again, there's no right and wrong answer to this, but that's that kind of range, or out of state, or if you have big one-site properties, or if you have properties that have like weird things like Section 42 or project-based HAP contracts or stuff that we're not going to go into today. Yeah, you got to get licensed and approved, all this stuff. Yeah, give it to a property management company. Don't deal with that stuff yourself. We actually know that you should not deal with that. We were dealing with a 12 unit that we're having to basically get. Yeah, they had a bad story. When you're talking to when you're looking at property management, first of all, it's the same thing with any sort of contract. And I've been over this in my live streams and articles all the time. Ask for references. If they've done well by another real estate investor, they'll likely do well by you. So the first place you go to your RIA events. If there's a BiggerPockets meetup, go there. There's all sorts of, you can just easily on Meetup. Go to meetup.com and see if there's a real estate event. If you don't have a RIA group, although I've seen RIAs in pretty much every city. If you're getting bigger properties, go to your CCI moves. Go to the CPM, or not CPM. Go to the IREM, IREM, And generally, those are bigger property managers. Those are actually property managers. But just ask for references. Who do you use? Who do you recommend? What have you heard about? Post in BiggerPockets. Do you have a recommendation? That's the first place to start. The next thing is you want to interview that property manager. There's some good articles on this. I hate to recommend one that's from a site that's not BiggerPockets, but there's a good article, just the top 20 questions to ask before hiring a property management company from Landlordology. And some of the good ones, I'd ask broad questions, a mix of broad and pointed questions. Some questions like, what's your current, like, how many units and what's your current occupancy? What's your economic occupancy? How many people how many evictions do you have?
Also, do your best to verify these things. People can say anything, but get something that shows, like, if they say they only have 10 rentals on them, or like they have, 10 things out of 100 that are on the market, but then you look on their website, they got 20 all of a sudden. Okay, verify what you can. It's easy to say things and make it look better than it actually is.
And ask, I think one of the hints that when you ask a specific question, do you get a specific answer?
Yeah.
Like if you ask, what's your occupancy? And they're like, oh, it's like, 90-ish or something. I mean, most of them are done. That's one answer. Another answer is 92.7%.
Yeah, or we have 6 vacancies.
Yeah, or something like that. So like those are better answers. How long you've been doing it? How do you screen? You want to hear them give you a very detailed process.
That's super huge.
You want to hear they require 3 times the rent, income and rent. You want that they have a year of rental history with very few, if any, late pays, no evictions, no felonies. We do,
and also make sure they're actually following through on the things they say they're screening. I know property management as an industry, everybody says they screen for the same things, but I am 100% sure very few of them actually do it correctly.
Yeah, and you want to be able to, you want them to send you the background reports and also have something they should have to send you a form that says when they call the previous landlord, when they call their employer to get those checks, they should have to put that down there. What do they find? And then you should be able to approve those. They shouldn't just do them behind your back.
If you're nervous about going to property management company but you feel like you need to or something like that, and you want to hold on to some piece of the whole thing, my dad kind of talked about it in the comments on Facebook. If you're on Facebook, the screening part is the most important part. And honestly, if you can, make it so your property management company has to verify every tenant they approve through you. Not all property management companies will be willing to do that, but
screening for new hires in marriage. Do you do a background check on mom?
For you on Facebook or on YouTube, you're not seeing this.
Sorry.
Dad is commenting.
Never
on
mind.
Facebook.
That's a funny joke.
But anyways, it's just, if you can stay a part of that process, I would say stay a part of the screening process. That won't take a ton of your time, and that's the most important. If you get that part right, you're gonna get most of property management right. So. That's what I would say with that. So if you're going to keep it, and that's not going to be a huge time investment or anything like that, it might be hard to convince a property management company to let you be a part of that, but if you can, I would recommend trying to do that. So
other questions, how do you determine rents? How do you, if a property's not renting, what do you do? How do you market a property?
And you need to know how to do all this stuff yourself, so if they're telling you answers that actually make sense.
How do you deal with maintenance? How do you charge for that? Same with turnover. Do you charge an oversight fee? What is that percentage? How many bids do you get? If I reject a bid, how does that go through? How big is your list of contacts?
At what amount of money that you're going to spend, or you're going to call me before you actually do the work?
Absolutely, that's a big one.
How long can it wait for me to respond if there's an AC issue that's going to cost $3,000?
Yeah, I'd say $1,000 is the minimum. Maybe even less. But if it's an issue over $1,000, you should have to. They should have to call you before they do it, unless it's an absolute emergency. So there's a lot of websites like that. I check them out and always ask for references. They will give you them and call them, and they'll often tell you things. I mean, a lot of people just assume if they're going to give you a reference, they're going to give you a perfect reference, but you just ask the same kind of questions.
Interesting references from people.
From clients that we have one client for a property management company that they had referred, that we were looking at for some properties we had that were further away. Kind of told us that he had to fly in from Atlanta or something like that, and work with them the whole weekend to fix their books because they were such a mess. And it was like, oh, okay. Well, thank you for telling me that. So you definitely want to check references.
A couple of quick questions that I want to get to right here. Ryan had a really good one. Where is it? A property manager said if they place a tenant, they'll pay for the eviction. Is this usual? I would say
Unusual.
no, but honestly, I wouldn't care about that very much. I don't know what state you're in and how expensive evictions is, but the court costs for evictions are not really what I'm concerned about.
I mean, that's a good.
It's a good marketing tool, but here
Yeah.
the reason why that would make me nervous is because it wouldn't make me nervous. I would say that's better than nothing, but I wouldn't mean a lot of value to me because you just never want to get a resident in there that's going to get evicted in the first place. Now that lines up the incentives of they don't want to have to evict somebody, but when you have to evict someone, the things that you're really going to cost you is not collecting rent for however long they're in the property, not paying rent for, the damage they're doing to the property, the cost to turn it over again, and the cost to re-rent it. The actual court costs of the evictions are not the huge cost. Obviously, the property management company won't want to pay those fees, but also you don't want someone who's going to string along residents and try to kind of get payment arrangements going and kind of not collect full balances. If you need to evict them, you want to evict them. So I don't think that's a bad policy. I just don't think that necessarily means
it kind of
great.
sounds like we trust ourselves. We're going to do it right. I like.
Hopefully
it in that
that's the case. I just have a couple small concerns
Sharon asks
there.
if the owner doesn't want a dog, but the tenant has ESA. Is that like for a site or is that for?
That's a service animal. I can't remember exactly what it
But
stands for.
you have to accept it, and you cannot charge.
Is it emergency service animal?
I think so. Yeah. I think it's a federal law, but if it's not, it's every state. You have to.
You can't charge any extra
no
money
pet
or anything
rent,
like that.
no pet deposit. You have to accept it.
You can verify that they have this stuff
you
and
need to
get the information of the pet on
It's
file.
a doctor's note, right?
I believe so.
You can. I would demand verification. It make that a policy with everything you have. It's a policy, and you can always. If they're like, well, I don't want to. Like, why do I have to do this? Like, well, it's the policy. Everybody has to do it. If I treat you special, I'm literally breaking the law, and so it's like, I'm sorry, I have to do it.
There is one distinction.
Force yourself to do this.
That I'm not actually 100% certain on. There is a difference between an emotional support animal, like Jessica in the comments is saying, and a actual service animal. A service animal is like a seeing eye dog.
Okay.
And an emotional support animal is like, something a therapist would say it helps with your emotional state. I believe they're treated the same.
Dad, can you help us out here in the comments?
I'm not 100% sure they're treated. I'm like 99% sure they're treated the same. We treat them the same here.
Jessica, who's our cousin Jessica, who also buys real estate with our dad in Emporia. Hi, Jessica. She says Amanda said they have to have doctor's note with a letter. That's true.
Yeah, that's what
now the question is emotional support dealt with in a different way? I don't think so either.
I just can't remember 100%.
Yeah, so check with the attorney, but I'm
99% sure.
You got to accept them. Can't charge rent, but you can demand a doctor's note and verification. So let's see. Do we have any other questions here? Is Trenton? Are we going to archive this? Yes, it will be up on. You can just go to the BiggerPockets Facebook page, or you can go to the BiggerPockets.com or their YouTube channel. It will be right there, and you can watch it anytime
Next
you want.
one has a question. Must you search for a property manager that's in the area where your properties are, or does it matter if they are maybe halfway across the city? Depends how big the city is. I would just ask them, where are their rental properties that they already manage? If they don't manage anything close to where your stuff is, I wouldn't choose them.
Yeah, it's actually a good kind of tangent there. If the property management company you want to select might be a good management company, but not for what you're dealing with. Like, okay, with Yarko, you will not get them to manage houses, but they wouldn't be any good at it because they manage big apartment complexes. If they focus on luxury housing, they're not going to be good for Section 8 and vice versa. And of course, if like Kansas City's pretty big, generally property management companies will manage anywhere. But if all their stuff is in Wyandotte County and Kansas City, Kansas, and you have a bunch of properties in Jackson County, Kansas City, Missouri, it's probably not the best property management.
They won't know the rents. They won't, they won't know the local area and what to charge for rent or just
area, class of properties. I mean, you want them to. They need to fit what you're doing. In the same way, like contractor, you don't want to get a contractor who's normally doing, working for homeowners on, multi-million-dollar luxury custom houses in Mission Hills, which is, if you know Kansas City, it's like they're just castles. They're not even houses. When you're doing a property that ARV is like $50,000, I mean, you got to find the right contractor. You got to find the right property manager, and they might be good, but they might not be what you're looking for.
Tina has a pretty good question. How would you suggest getting feedback from renters regarding the property manager without making it known that you are the owner? Honestly, I've never done this myself, but honestly, I don't think it's a bad idea to just ask the property manager permission to contact the residents and just ask them upon move out. And I don't even know if it really matters if you're the owner or not. Maybe it does, but I think just saying like, hey, I want to make sure you guys were treated right while you lived at the property and make sure I'm not entrusting my resources to someone who I shouldn't be. How did the whole tenancy go? Just talking to them is probably the best way to do it. I've never done something like that before myself, so I can't verify that it works well, but that would make sense to me.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to go around your property manager, but if you're going through it,
I would ask
really,
them if that's okay.
It wouldn't really generally be a problem for you to tell them that you're the owner.
Yeah.
Because I mean, the only problem with telling the owner there's different thoughts on this is like if you're managing the property, I generally don't want to tell them I'm the owner. I'm not gonna outright lie to them, but I just like it's not relevant. So why am I bringing it up? Why am I giving them some hammer to beat me with? You know, it's like, oh, well, you're the owner, you can take a discount. Why are you so greedy? It's like, well, it has nothing to do with anything. Like it's just nothing. Reggie has been asking some questions. Sorry, Reggie, we've mostly been looking at the Facebook and YouTube number, but I'd say so. Above 5 units, consider a property manager seems to be the biggest question. And I would say, at any point, it might make sense to consider a property manager. I mean, even with one, that's not. I mean, our recommendation is to start off early on, probably on your own. But then again, if you have a high wage, high stress, long hour job, probably not. Or if it's out of state. With 5 or 6, I mean, yeah, you can manage yourself. Especially, let's say you're buying and flipping, and so you're flipping houses and you're holding some. So you're a full-time real estate investor. Well, maybe it makes sense to manage your own. But if you have 5, 6, 10 houses and you're not a full-time real estate investor, and you also have your job, and maybe it's not like a 60-hour work week job, you're only working 40 hours a week, but do you have enough time to deal with those 10 houses? Probably not. I mean, it's just like there's 1,000 different possible, or maybe you and your spouse are doing it together, and maybe you have very little time, but your spouse has a decent amount of time. Maybe it makes sense for you to manage it yourself. I mean, there's 1,000 things to take into account, but generally, when you start the area that I would most consider a property manager is the small to mid-sized investor who's not a full-time investor.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, even if they are full-time investors, it might make sense to hand them off. But that's what I really consider.
Too. I mean, if you don't want to be bogged down with it, with dealing with 200 units, and that's where you're trying to get to, then at some point you're probably going to want to pass that stuff off to somebody else. But again, it depends on what your life is, what your goals are, what your situation is. We can't make that decision for you. We're just trying to give you some questions to think about, some of the risks, concerns about each side of it, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sharon has a question on Facebook. If you have a choice, a Section 8 house or regular tenant to manage, which would you prefer? Generally, I would always prefer the regular resident, and that's not for the reason most people would say. A lot of people have a lot of bad things to say about a Section 8 residence. I don't really necessarily think the stereotypes are true. I think the reason the stereotypes exist is because people don't screen Section 8 residents properly, and so they end up with the worst of the Section 8 residents rather than just the standard Section 8 resident there is. The reason, honestly, why I would choose a regular resident is because you don't have to deal with HUD or any government agencies in that respect. We have 4 or 5 different Section 8 offices in Kansas City, Missouri Metro. 2 or 3 of them are pretty easy to work with, but it is a lot of extra steps, a lot of extra management. And then there's one particular, Kansas City, Missouri, is almost impossible to work with, and we've chosen not to work with them any longer because it's just too much work to deal with them. And so it's just not worth it. And you're really not getting many benefits. Even if the rent is being paid by HUD, the other problems outweigh that usually compared to normal residents. And on top of that, a lot of times there's already a portion by the resident anyway, so you're still dealing with the collecting rent, you're still dealing with late fees, you're still dealing with all the same stuff too. The biggest reason to rent a Section 8 is you have more potential renters to rent to, which means there's more demand on your house, which means you can generally rent it for more money.
That's the same reason we accept pets in our houses and also cats in our duplexes. Or we accept pets in our houses and duplexes and cats.
Cats in apartments that have an exterior entry.
And the reason is, I mean, we charge pet rent of $25 a pet. We probably charge $250 pet non-refundable pet deposit. That probably breaks even, maybe a small little bit on top. It probably breaks even. But the big thing is a lot more people willing, you have a lot more prospects. Nick had a question about, is there a certain percentage of the potential rental income you guys do not cross over on management fees? I'm not sure exactly what you mean by crossover.
I think, first of all, we don't charge management fees generally, where we don't manage for other companies for the most part.
It's just our partnership.
Yeah, just we don't really do outside third-party management all that much. We have had other people manage for us before. But basically, mass percent of what you would spend on management things. I mean, generally, I would say 10% is probably the maximum.
10% in 1 month's rent.
Yeah, I mean, and that's probably on the expensive side, but that's probably the maximum I think would be reasonable.
And you try to get a little bit less, but I mean,
and then there's always stuff that's negotiable. Who gets the late fees? Who gets all sorts of stuff? It's all negotiable.
Yeah, I don't want to split the.
And I'd rather pay way more for a property manager who knows what they're doing compared to try to get a discount rate from a mediocre property manager. It's always going to be better.
With property manager, it's much less about how much they're charging you, much more about how
just
good
get the good one. Yeah, don't worry about the price of much.
We're already at an hour, so let's fly. We got 2 other things I wanted to go through. Maybe schedule another one of these, but I mean, managing the manager. I mean, with regards to managing the manager, you want to request consistent documentation by a certain time of the month every month. So you want to know, you want the rent roll, you want your receivables report, how many people are behind, how long are they behind. You like your profit and loss statement, and you also want like what were the expenses, like what listed, like how much did I mean, that will be the profit and loss, but you might want it broken down by properties, particularly if they have big rehabs. If you have big rehabs and whatnot. The major invoices you got, what were they? You want to look over these very carefully. Like if something's out of whack, if a property, like checking, like if a property's been vacant for a while, like get on them. I mean, one of the best things is just the squeaky wheel gets the grease. You don't want to be annoying, but a little bit,
I will say, where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah.
If something doesn't feel right, something doesn't look right, they're kind of giving you a talk around. That's really easy to do in property management. Explain problems away and give rationales for them. When there's smoke, if you're not getting your payments on time from rent, something's going on. Look at it.
And they're acting like they're going to try to gaslight you if they're not good.
Yes.
So, but it's like, it's kind of one of those things like, an excuse. Excuses, like the way I see excuses, like sometimes they're true, but they create a trend. And no one has infinite bad luck. And if it's always the same thing, if it's one excuse after the next, that's a trend, and that means they're not any good. And these excuses are bogus. If it's an excuse here and an excuse there, I mean, things happen. That makes sense. But looking for trends, if property stays vacant for a long time, these expenses seem a lot higher than they are. Check them. Ask a contractor. Do these expenses seem right? Ask another investor. Ask pointed and specific questions. I mean, that if nothing else, that will get them knowing that you are paying attention. Like, why is the utility bill on this property so high? Okay, that's very specific. They might not know, and that's probably not fair to expect them to know right off the bat. But just you want them to know they're watching. If you're out of state, make sure you visit from time to time. Ask for tours, and never be afraid to switch property management companies.
Yes.
At least you often will have to do that. I've seen it done. I've seen people switch from bad property manager to a decent one, and things improve drastically. And the biggest thing I've seen is the maintenance and turnover expenses drop a lot.
Well, and also, I mean, it's rare that a property management company is going to be mad at you for going somewhere else. It's not like you typically could go back. Honestly, you probably won't want to most of the time, but if you go to someone else and they're way worse, and the other person you realize is that they actually were doing a pretty good job, it's just they're in a difficult situation with my properties or whatever, I don't know why they would say, oh, you scorned me, I'm never going back to you again, unless you're just kind of rude or a bad business person. Then I don't know why they wouldn't take you back in that situation. They want more business, so
yeah, they do. With regards to any other point in regards to managing the manager, we're kind of flying through this because we're already over an hour, but
I'd say the biggest thing is make sure you're getting good residents in the property. Make sure they're not taking short-term benefits for long-term costs in terms of getting everything full so they keep you happy now, but they're really putting in poor residents in there. So make sure they're long-term, they're setting up for success long-term and not just taking care of short-term problems. And where there's smoke, there's fire. Those would be the biggest things.
Yeah, and make sure, don't be afraid to switch. Make sure you always be checking the reports. Demand the reports, demand accountability. Make sure to visit. Ask them to bring through your properties every once in a while. Ask for multiple bids. You should see this as effectively a part-time gig, a part-time job. You do not just get to hire a property manager and just sit back. It's not like stock investing. You don't just get to buy a portfolio and do whatever. I mean, you've got to be on top of it. The last thing, give a quick rundown on how to start your own property manager. We'll probably just really fly through this just to get out of here because we all got our weekend coming up. But the first thing I'd say is, I mean, BiggerPockets is a great resource. Go check out our previous live stream. I'll link it in the chat here afterwards. We did it on property management. Brandon's book, the book on property management, book on how to manage the book on how to manage rental properties. You can find it on BiggerPockets. Brandon Turner's book. That's a great one. Also, Mr. Landlord. He's very ingenuitive with regards to property management. Mr. Landlord Survival Toolkit. Yeah, definitely.
Or Landlord Survival Guide.
Landlord Survival Guide by Mr. Landlord or Jeffrey Taylor.
Yeah.
Check out those two books and get on BiggerPockets and check out our previous live stream. And I'll post a couple articles in the chat here. There are fair housing classes that are happening every city pretty much. You'll want to go to them. You'll want to buy, or not buy, you can get it for free. The tenant landlord law. It's usually like for Kansas City or Jackson County, it was 30 pages, I think. So it's not that bad, but you want to read that over. You're going to need to get either documents for this, LegalZoom, Nolo.com. There's places you can go. I would get them and I'd customize a little bit, add things that you think you should add, and always have a lawyer check it over. These are very vague legal documents. You want to get what you need there, and you want to make sure if you're adding any addendums, any extra things to your lease, that you have a lawyer look that over. They can usually do that pretty cheap because they can do it in 30 minutes or an hour. So you want to get all that. If you're going to be, I would try not to ever meet a tenant at your house ever.
Yes.
See it as our dad used to meet at his office was the Wendy's next, across the street from his old home. That can be your office, or you can sign the lease at the house or wherever. But this is a business. It's immediately a business from day one. It's a business.
There's a lot of co-working spaces too. So if you get to a certain size, I mean, that's becoming a really popular thing. That would have been really difficult to do 20 years ago, but that's become a really popular thing these days. And it wouldn't look unprofessional at all to have your office there and even get a name for your company and all that stuff. You could look really professional doing it that way. So
yeah. You're going to need a property. I mean, early on, if you have one property, you can probably get away with Excel or whatever, but you will eventually need a property management software. If you don't have a lot of properties, Buildium is really good from what I saw.
Yeah, we used it for only a little while, but it worked pretty well.
It seemed pretty good. I've heard good things about it. I see it like there's like levels. Like Buildium's good, and then Appfolio is good. Like when you kind of mid-sized, and then when you're bigger, Rent Manager, which we use, is really good.
One site,
more expensive, and then you got big properties, one site.
A lot of people talk about Cozy nowadays. I don't have much experience with it, so I can't really speak to it. But I know that's been a popular one for people. I just don't know.
There are other options too now. Kind of on that Cozy is a new thing, but it's like. For like if you're managing yourself, you can get Rently or Show Mojo boxes where you don't even have to go out to the property. So there's new ways to integrate technology into your system.
So Verna said Starbucks is her office, and I think that's kind of humorous because the Wendy's that our dad used to have his office in is now a Starbucks. So it's just it's a good.
I mean, especially if urban hipsters are your primary clientele. I mean, Starbucks makes perfect sense for them.
Starbucks is a great place to do business meetings of any kind. So.
Of course, and then of course, when you're being a property manager, you want to be fair but firm, treat everyone the same. Pretty much
learn your fair housing.
Learn your fair housing. Read the landlord tenant guide. I mean, the basic way is treat everyone the same, and every policy applies to everyone the same. I mean, there's some complications.
One quick thing with that. If you don't do that, one, you're technically breaking the law, but also you're going to give in to the people who are yelling at you and angry and forcing you to give them stuff, and the people who are actually nice to you and saying, I'll deal with this, whatever. You're going to treat the people who treat you badly better than the people who treat you well. Why do that? Just treat them all the same, and that way the good residents are going to get taken care of well, and they'll want to stay, and you won't end up with just the people who are yelling at you for things.
It's easy to blame a policy, a lease, the law. Much easier than having to say, well, I just don't want to let you do it because I'm not a nice person. And so and we talk a lot more about that stuff in our previous podcast live stream that we had together, which I'll link in the chat here at the end. But I think we're near an hour and 10 minutes. So there's no time limit on these things. We could go as long as we want. If you guys want.
My wife expects me to get home, so
there's that issue. So.
I gotta go see my genius daughter. So who's gonna win the Nobel Peace Prize, right?
Yeah. You don't have to be a genius to win the Peace Prize.
Oh yeah, just a Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Anyways. we're gonna sign off. I'll be back next week. We're gonna talk math. I'm gonna talk about math, real estate calculations, and how to go through that and when they're useful. Otherwise, everyone have a great weekend. Financial Investor asks, "What is a weekend?" It's
Saturday and Sunday. I mean,
Friday
you can work on
evening is
them.
often included in there.
Sorry, I'm being a little unrealistic. But yeah, you're gonna have to work on the weekend in real estate a lot of time. It's a hustle. So,
anyways, thank you all for joining us. Have a great weekend, and I will see you. Phil will not. He won't be here.
I'm not doing the math part. So
I'll see you next week. Have a
See
great
you
one,
guys.
guys.